Dan is here with a quick update on a story we've talked about a lot on Moneybox. Big news, Dan, for people who bought leasehold houses in England and Wales.
Yes, very much so, Paul. 4 of the UK's largest house builders are being investigated by the Competition and Markets Authority, or CMA, for what it's described as troubling evidence of, quote, potentially unfair contract terms and mis-selling. Now, the companies involved are Barratt Developments, Countryside Properties, Persimmon Homes and Taylor Wimpey. The CMA also said if its investigation finds this has been the case, it will not be tolerated. So very strong language from the CMA, with another point it made about it being unacceptable for housing developers to mislead or take advantage of home buyers.
Yeah, certainly taking it very seriously. What might these developers actually have done wrong?
Well, as you're aware, Paul, what's become known as the leasehold scandal was when people bought homes, but instead of buying the freehold and owning the land their home was on, they bought the leasehold. Now, it's thought to have affected around 100,000 people who bought houses over the last decade or so. Now, these leaseholders were tied into contracts that saw annual ground rents of just a few £100s in many cases dramatically increase without much to show for it. Then also, again, in many cases, the leases were sold on to third parties without the homeowner's knowledge, putting up the cost of buying the freehold and imposing hefty fees for home improvements or extensions.
Now, there are 4 developers in the frame, if you like, by the CMA. What have they said to you?
Well, Barratt said it's committed to putting its customers first and would continue to cooperate with the CMA, as did Taylor Wimpey. Persimmon said it stopped selling leasehold homes where it owned the freehold 3 years ago. And finally, Countryside said it's committed to resolving the issue to the satisfaction of its customers.
OK, thanks, Dan. Well, let's talk now to Jo Darbyshire. Jo Darbyshire, you bought a leasehold house 10 years ago. You're one of the people who runs the National Leasehold Campaign, and you've talked to me on Moneybox before about your struggle to get these issues resolved. What do you make of this announcement from the Competition and Markets Authority?
I'm thrilled. It feels like vindication for all the years of campaigning from me and lots of other leaseholders that no, we were missold our properties by these developers.
Yes, I mean, the authority has said it suspects there's been this. It's looking into it, so we can't accuse the companies yet of that, but it's certainly a very strong statement about mis-selling and about unfair contract terms. How has that affected you? Just remind listeners about what it's done to you, how it's made things difficult for you.
Yeah, so we bought the property back in 2010, and then 11 months later the freehold was sold on to an offshore investor, and at that point the cost to buy the freehold went from the £5,000 that the developer told us it would cost to over £30,000. So
just for people who don't understand about leasehold and freehold, and I know from previous programmes there's quite a lot, when you bought your house, normally when you buy a house there's a garden or a plot of land, you buy the whole thing, but you were just sold a leasehold on that, and the ground itself, if you like, still belonged to the developer. They were going to sell it to you for £5,000, but after they'd sold it on to this, what you describe as an offshore investment company, they said no, not 5, it's going to be £30,000. Is that really what happened?
Yeah, that's really what happened, and what I've found out since, Paul, is that it's common practice for these deals to sell freeholds to have been done before a brick was laid. So at the time the developer knew they planned to sell it on, and they knew what the financial consequences for me would be, and yet there was no, I mean, that's why from my perspective it's absolute mis-selling, because information that was critical to my decision making was withheld.
So they didn't tell you, the developer didn't tell you that they were going to do this, but you think
No.
they planned it all along. A way of getting extra income as far as they're concerned, I guess.
Absolutely, because they're developers, so it's not their job to manage freeholds on an ongoing basis.
So what do you hope will happen next? What do you think will come out of this CMA investigation?
What I would absolutely love, Paul, is if these developers were just to do the right thing without being forced to. In my case, it's simple. I'd like to be put back into the same financial position I would have been in had I not been missold. So I'd like my freehold for £5,000, and I'd like a refund on all the ground rent I've paid over the last 9 years. But I suspect that they won't choose to do that, and that we have a long fight ahead still. And they may need to be taken to court, but it's akin to, this has been called the PPI of the housing industry, and I think it's exactly that, and we as consumers who were misled need full redress.
Yeah, so you want the CMA to say you should have all that money back. Of course, the developers, I don't know which one yours was, but they've said they'll continue to cooperate, that they are committed to resolving it to the satisfaction of their customers. So they've said the right things. Are you suspicious they might not do the right things from your experience?
Absolutely, they will do the minimum they have to do to get away with. I mean, my developer Taylor Wimpey they sold me a house with doubling ground rent. You know, they've had a much lauded scheme about we're converting them all to RPI and the problem's gone away. The problem doesn't go away. I'm still left with a leasehold house where it's not as bad as I don't actually own the land. I don't own a brick of the house. The only thing I own is the right to live in that property. And there's permission fees if I want to do anything structurally to the house of thousands of pounds.
So if you want to make adaptations, or the sort of thing homeowners normally expect they're free to do, you have to pay someone else thousands of pounds for permission to do that.
Yes. So one of my neighbours wanted a small extension, so small it doesn't even need planning permission, and the permission fee alone was over £2,000.
Yes. So what you really hope then is the CMA will stop all of this. Do you think that's a possibility?
I do, and I really hope this is the first point, you know, for stopping leasehold houses. Houses should never be leasehold. Now, banning, you know, ground rents to zero, which effectively, you know, will be the start of the end for the leasehold system, I hope, in England and Wales. And just so much more education is needed about what leasehold is.
Your campaign group has been talking about this for a long time. Is this the first time you've really felt there was some hope at the end?
I think it's been, for me, you know, 4 years of campaigning there, it's been peppered with the odd high point. You know, the government announcement that they would ban leasehold houses and zeroise ground rents, you know, but that was 3 years ago and there's still no legislation. The recent Law Commission reports on common hold and right to manage were fabulous as well. So I do feel like we're getting there, but I read something this morning that said that the pace was glacial, and I thought that was a fantastic word to use.
Right, well, I'm sure we'll come back to you when we hear anything more from the Competition and Markets Authority, and let's hope it is good news for you. But thanks very much for talking to us. That's Jo Darbyshire.